Hello, Amit. Good evening and welcome. I hope you're keeping well, Amit. Those who've joined me here can quickly let me know through the chat box. You can ping me here in the chat and we can have this discussion. Those who've joined in, quickly let me know. Good evening, everyone. I am Manisha, and I'm here with this amazing session by Leverage IELTS, brought to you by Leverage Edu. I'm one of the trainers here, and I'm here to help you learners with an interesting section that is speaking section of IELTS. Good evening, Amit. So, to tell you, see, IELTS, the pattern, you know the test pattern. You know that there are four skills that you will be assessed on: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. Now, when it comes to speaking, let's talk about a few key tips. Today, like as I have mentioned, that there are five key tips that I'm going to mention here in the session today to help you know and plan your practice even better and score as much as you want, your ideal score, your desired scores. Okay, everyone here, quickly interact with me in the chat box. Those who are here live with me, keep there with me. If you have any queries, you have the chat box, put your queries there. If you When I interact with you, when I ask you questions, because I have some questions for you, you can answer them through the chat box and we can interact therefore. So let's start with this, learners. I have a question to start with. Quickly tell me, do you know that you can ask a few questions to the examiner? Do you know that? Yes or no? Quickly tell me. Do you know that you can ask certain questions to the examiner? What are these questions that we'll talk about? But tell me yes or no. Are you aware of this? Yes, Amit. And everyone else, quickly. Amit says yes. What about others? Are we allowed to question the examiner, maybe about a few things that we wish to know? Learners, to tell you, like Amit says yes. Quickly, others also can share their responses here. Yes, that's very true. You can question the examiner. But is it that you're going to cross question or ask some other things? Let's say the examiner asks you, do you like tea or coffee? You are also asking the examiner, do you like tea and coffee? That's not the case. You cannot question such things to the examiner. But there are three things that you can ask the examiner. What are these three things? Number one, now listen carefully. If needed, you can make notes, learners. These are a few things which will help you a lot in understanding and in grabbing better scores. Number one, what is the question that you can ask the examiner? If in case you do not understand the question, let's say you couldn't listen to it clearly because of the mask that the examiner is wearing, or it could be any other reason, maybe the accent. If you do not understand the question, you can tell the examiner to repeat the question, but avoid using sorry, pardon. Don't do that. See, this is not wrong, but there are better ways. You should structure it in proper sentence, and you can say, could you please repeat the question? Or can you repeat the question, please? So you have these structures, full sentences to use instead of saying sorry. Oh, what did you say? Do not do it just abrupt, but structure it properly. This is number one. What else can you ask the examiner? Any guesses, learners? What else can you ask the examiner? Anyone here who has a guess or so? And then I'll take you to that. What is the next thing that you can ask the examiner? There's one more thing that you can ask the examiner. Number two is, for example, you don't understand the question's meaning. For example, a question comes up and you don't understand the meaning of that question because certain words are like problematic, or you don't get the context. What would you do? You can ask the examiner to rephrase it. So what would you say? You will say, could you please rephrase the question? Or, can you rephrase the question, please? Or can you explain the question? Can you explain it a bit more? So you have to ask the examiner exactly what you want. There is no harm. If you are wondering that your score probably might get disturbed or harmed, or you will get lower scores because of this, then that's a big no. Not at all. These things you can yes, it should not happen often that every question you want an explanation, you don't understand, you want it to be simplified all the time. That should not happen. But at times, maybe once or twice, if this happens, that's absolutely okay. Number three, there's third thing that you can ask the examiner. What's that? That is a particular word that you don't understand. For example, a question is asked and there's a complex word used in that question. You don't understand the meaning of that question, that word. You can ask the examiner to explain the meaning of that word. What will you say? You will say, could you please explain the meaning of this word? Whatever word it is, you have to point out, could you please explain the meaning of this word? And that's how it's going to go. You can also cross check and confirm that by this, do you mean this? Whatever the meaning is, you can confirm what you understood. Is that what the examiner wanted to say? If yes, great, you can go ahead with the answer. If not, examiner will clarify. Examiners are not that rude or harsh, okay? So feel free to question, to ask them up. That's absolutely okay. That's tip number one for today. Anyone with any questions around that? Everyone. Here, I have so many people. Come on, learners. Interact with me in the chat box. At least tell me, do you have any questions around this first tip? Yes or no? I hope it's clear to all of us. And then I'll move on to number two. Point number two that I have to discuss with you. See, in speaking, there are various questions that the examiner asks, and it's not very sure that you know answer to every question. Well, Amit, I'm coming to the same question. Yeah, that's my tip number two for today, Amit. So Amit has this query that what if I don't have an answer to a question? See, Amit, you don't know the answer. That's not possible because this is not a general knowledge test. It's very generic questions about you or things and people around you. So it's not that complex. Okay. So you will have answers to every question, but yes, it might take some time for you to bring up the answers. But sometimes this happens that you don't know what to say. Like the idea doesn't click what to do at that time. Or a question is such that's unusual and weird, you don't know what to say. And that moment, you have two things to do. If it's an unusual question, first of all, don't panic. That's absolutely okay. Don't panic. But use this that you take some time from the examiner. I am merging tip number two and tip number three together. That is how to answer, how to deal with unusual questions, and how to borrow some time from the examiner. To manage unusual questions, you will have to borrow a few seconds from the examiner. And how do we borrow some seconds from the examiner? We cannot just say, okay, wait, let me think. You cannot do that. But you can definitely say, well, that's an interesting question, or well, that's really complex to answer. So, when you are saying this, somewhere in your mind, the question should be processing, and you must be thinking of the answer to the question. One, when it's an unusual question, don't panic. Take some time from the examiner, a few seconds maybe, and just say, well, that's an interesting question. Okay, let me see. I'll have to think about this. You can use such frames and you can then take it. You have some time, think and answer. But if the question is such that you probably still are confused, okay, then you have to always remember this, that whatever the topic or question is, think about relating it to yourself. You will always have an answer. There is no space that you don't have an answer. You will always and always have an answer. Okay. So remember to this. Good evening, Saini. Good evening. So that's how you borrow some time and You respond to unusual questions. Remember, when there's an unusual question, don't suddenly panic, because of that you lose your confidence, and often people ruin their entire test. So don't let that happen. Stay calm, think whatever first strikes your mind, start with it and keep connecting. Okay. I remember a student got this question that, describe a time when you observed a wild animal closely. Now that person has never, like, wild animal, nothing was coming to his mind, and like, what to say. So what he did was he molded it. You address the question. Now listen, this is another tip there, adding to this part only, how to deal with unusual questions. You have to address the question, then you can mold it wisely in your favor. How? You tell the examiner that, well, wild animals, I'm not really, I would never go close to them, and even with my wildest of dreams. But talking of animals, I adore dogs. And then you can take the conversation forward with dogs. Address that part, but don't just instantly move to dogs. Okay, you have to address the question. You cannot just deviate from the main idea. Then you can take it forward with the connecting ideas. Amit, like I just said, borrowing time is only a few seconds that you can borrow, 2 to 4 seconds. And in those 2 to 4 seconds, also, it's not that you can keep quiet. You just have to say, okay, well, let me see. That's an interesting question to talk about. I've never thought about this, but I would say, and then you add to it. So this is how you're going to borrow time, Amit. Are you getting it, Amit? You cannot borrow 30 seconds, 60 seconds. You can only borrow a few seconds. So that's when you're talking only, and at that moment only you borrow and you speak up the next part. Okay. Are these 3 points clear? Number one was when I started that you have this point that you can ask questions, three situations where you can question the examiner. Number two, how to deal with unusual questions. To deal with unusual question, you need to borrow time, and I've just told you how to borrow time from the examiner. Three things we've just covered. Wonderful. Let's move on to number four. Number four is your part two. Four and five, tip number four and tip number five, both are associated to part two. With this, I'm going to tell you how to initiate your part two, and I'm also going to tell you how to structure your part two. So listen closely, everyone, those who face problem in their speaking part two. Which is this part two? Is this the cue card section? Yes or no, everyone? Speaking part two is the cue card section. Yes or no? Come on, tell me. Well, yes, Amit, that's right. It is the cue card section. You get the cue card, a question is written, and you have the bullet questions, and you have to answer that, right? Now, how to initiate part two and how to structure part two. These are the two last tips. Quickly listen to it, understand it, and then if you have questions, you can ask me up. Great, Gaurav. So, how to start with part two? Do not give it an abrupt start. Please do not do this. Abrupt start with that, what do I mean? People generally, let's say the question is describe a time when you closely observed a wild animal that I just now addressed, and you start with, okay, the cheetah is the one that I lately observed in the zoo or in the jungle or in the safari. You have given that an abrupt start to the answer. You have to avoid an abrupt start to the answer. Instead, your answer should have a backdrop. A backdrop is some sort of introduction to your main idea, and then you come up with your main idea and then further details to it. Listen, the structure. See the structure of part two. You have to start with the background information, okay, where you introduce your main idea. Then step two is where you talk about your main idea, you explain and elaborate it. And the third thing is, step three is where you add additional information, where you provide additional information. Maybe you have some more stories to add, examples to add, anything else that you can fill in that additional portion. I repeat, yes, listen carefully. Learners, Your part 2 should not have an abrupt or a direct start. You have to give it a backdrop. Okay. Backdrop is where you introduce the main idea. It could be, for instance, that I have observed many wild animals, but the one that I vividly remember is this, when I visited, something like that. Amit, part 2 is not where the examiner is going to give you a card in part 2 where the question is written on the card. You get 1 minute to prepare and then you have to speak for 2 minutes. Okay. So, yes, if it's part 1 and 3, you have to first listen and then speak. But if it's part 2, you have to read. Okay. So, part 2 is all about the cue card that you fetch. You don't have to worry about listening to the question then. Okay. And part 2 is the only place, Amit, where you get time to prepare. Part 1 and 3, there's no time for you to prepare your answers. You have to instantly answer the questions as the examiner asks, you have to answer also. Okay? Yeah, great. So, structuring of your part 2 goes in 3 steps. Step 1, background information. Step 2, your main idea. And step 3, where you are going to elaborate it at the additional information. Okay. Jyoti, part 3 is more of related to part 2 only. The topic, let's say the topic is animals. So, part 3 questions are based on animals only. You don't get any time, Jyoti, for part 3 questions to prepare. Okay, your answers. You have to instantly answer. Two key tips for part 3 that I would give you is one, give detailed answers. Don't give short answers. And number two, add examples to elaborate your responses. Okay. Examples can be fake, cooked up details. You can create those examples like false ones, stories or so. You don't have to be honest all the time. Okay, Jyoti? But two key tips for part two will be detailed answers, including examples. Okay. Very well. Yeah. So, speaking, see, overall, if I talk about speaking learners, you have to be natural and casual. That's it. Don't worry. Take it just a conversation with a stranger, maybe, and it's going to go really well. Natural and casual. Okay. This is what I have from my side for today to convey to you these key tips that I wanted to share, the secret tips for IELTS speaking, which probably most of you do not have. So, this is what I wanted to convey to you, learners, today. I hope you've learned something really interesting and new and useful. And hope and wait for another session very soon. Okay, coming week. So we'll come up with other modules also, listening, reading, writing as well, and we've had other sessions, so you can go through the recorded lessons also. Okay, Jyoti, I've just told you how to borrow time from the examiner. So I told you, no, how to borrow time. You will have to use these statements where you can use the fillers, and you can ask the examiner, like the question comes and you need 2 3 seconds to think, then you can say, well, that's interesting. Well, let me think about it. Or, well, I've never thought about it, but I would say. So when you use, that's an interesting question, I must say. To that I would add, and then you further answer the question. So you have to use those fillers, Jyoti, to borrow time. Okay. But you cannot just ask that, give me 2 seconds, give me 10 seconds, give me some time to think, because you don't have time to think. Okay. Yeah. I hope your queries are addressed. Great. All right, Jyoti. Great. So thank you, learners, for joining in today and participating really well. Amit, Gaurav, and Jyoti, Sayan. Thank you, everyone, learners. Have a great weekend ahead and happy learning. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. Goodbye.